Okay, so here we have the equation 2 times x minus 3 squared is equal to 10. And we're going to want to get the x on its own. The first thing to do here is to get rid of this 2. Okay? It's not always immediately obvious why, but we want to get rid of that 2. And it's pretty simple to do it. You can do it different ways, but the easiest way is to get rid of this 2 out in front. So to do that, let's divide both sides by 2. Okay? So that's going to give you 2 times x minus 3 squared divided by 2. And whatever you do on one side, you do on the other side. So 10 divided by 2 as well. Now on the left, the 2's will cancel. And that's going to leave you with x minus 3 squared is equal to 10 divided by 2 is 5. Now, all of this is squared. Okay, usually, at least in the past, we've just had x squared, but all of this is squared. So we have to remove the square from all of this before we can go on. So to remove a square, you have to remove the square from both sides by taking the square root. Okay, so you're going to take the square root of both sides. Okay, and don't forget that it's going to be plus or minus the square root on the right hand side. So what we're going to have here is the square root of x minus 3 squared is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. Well, on the left hand side, the square root and the square cancel, so that's just going to give you x minus 3. Okay, so the square root and the square cancel. That gives you x minus 3. On this side, we're just left with plus or minus the square root of 5. We don't know what the square root of 5 is, so just leave it as the square root of 5. Now, if we want to get x on its own, the last step is to move that negative 3 across to the other side. And that's going to give you, the screen stops jumping around on me, it's going to give you x is equal to, minus 3 comes across, becomes 3. And then we have plus or minus the square root of 5. So there are two answers there. X equals 3 plus the square root of 5, and x equals 3 minus the square root of 5 are both answers to this problem, are both correct answers. We're starting to see things that we haven't seen before. We haven't seen anything like x equals 3 plus root 5 or x equals 3 minus root 5 before. So as we're studying our math, it's getting a little bit more complicated now. Okay? Our answers aren't turning out to be nice simple numbers. And that's something that you're going to meet as you get older and as you get more exposed to math. Okay? Nothing to be scared of. It's just something that's going to take a little bit of time to get used to. So two answers. X equals 3 plus root 5. X equals 3 minus root 5 are your two answers. Or they can both be expressed in one expression like they were here. Okay? Now there are a couple of things about this that are interesting, and go right back to the start of the problem. One of them was, and so this is an aside, that's the problem finished, but a couple of things that were interesting. What you should have seen from this point is that square roots and squares cancel each other. Okay, so that's one thing you should have seen. And there were a couple of other things that are important for what's not allowed. If we have an expression, as we had here, x minus 3 squared, you can't, the x minus 3 squared that we had, you cannot distribute that power. Okay? You can't distribute an exponent or power into parentheses that contain plus or minus sign. Okay, so we had, what did we have in there? We had x minus 3 squared in there. Well, that is not the same as x squared minus 3 squared. So we're not allowed to distribute that 2 in. It doesn't work like that. The third thing that we're not allowed to do, we cannot multiply a number into parentheses if the parentheses have a power. So where we had 2 times x minus 3 squared, we're not allowed to multiply in that too. So it's not the same as 2x minus 6. We're not allowed to multiply the 2 in. We're not allowed to make that happen. It's not the same as 2x minus 6 squared. So sometimes what you're not allowed to do is just as important as what you are allowed to do. There's usually a way around it. As we saw, we got around that problem up here. That was the problem that we started with. How do we get around that problem? And we saw that there is a way to get around it. But we couldn't multiply in, and we couldn't just distribute the exponent. We had to find something else. So knowing what you're not allowed to do is as important as what you are allowed to do sometimes. Okay, thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned a lot in this video, I think, that you carry forward, both in terms of what you can do. Squares and square roots cancel each other out, and also in terms of what you can't do. You can't distribute exponents or powers into parentheses that contain plus or minus signs, and you can't multiply a number into parentheses if there's a power in the parentheses. You're never allowed to do those things.